40,000 years ago, a Neanderthal somewhere in what is now France carried his grandfather's body to a specific location, dug a grave, and placed flowers inside it. We know this because researchers found the pollen, concentrated, deliberate, not the random scatter you would expect from wind or animals dragging plant matter into a cave. Someone picked those flowers. Someone carried them to a burial. Someone grieved. This is not the species you were taught about. For most of the 20th century, Neanderthals were presented as a failed experiment. Hunched, brutish, low-browed, barely capable of language, wiped out because they simply could not compete with the superior intelligence of modern humans. This image is everywhere. In textbooks, in cartoons, in the word Neanderthal itself, which has become an insult for someone unintelligent. Almost none of it is accurate, and the actual evidence accumulated over the last 3 decades tells a story that is far stranger and far more uncomfortable than the simple narrative of replacement by a superior species. Start with the posture. The hunched, ape-like stance that defined Neanderthals in early reconstructions came from a single skeleton discovered in France in 1908 that belonged to an elderly individual with severe arthritis. The scientist who reconstructed it built an entire species image around one man's disease. Neanderthals stood upright. Their bone structure was heavier and more robust than ours, built for enormous physical strength, but the posture itself was not fundamentally different from yours. Now consider the brain. Neanderthal brain volume averaged slightly larger than modern human brain volume. Larger, not smaller. This single fact alone should have ended the primitive brute narrative decades ago, but it took surprisingly long to dislodge from popular imagination, partly because brain size alone does not determine intelligence, and partly because admitting Neanderthals may have been our cognitive equals raises uncomfortable questions about what actually happened to them. The burial evidence goes far beyond a single grave with flowers. At Shanidar Cave in Iraq, researchers have identified at least 10 individual burials spanning thousands of years, suggesting the location was deliberately and repeatedly used as a place for the dead. One of these individuals, known as Shanidar I, lived for years after suffering injuries that should have killed him immediately. A crushed arm that left him with a withered, partially amputated limb, and likely partial blindness and deafness from other trauma. He could not have hunted. He could not have defended himself. He survived for years anyway, which means someone fed him, protected him, and kept him alive through injuries that would have been a death sentence for any animal living alone. This pattern repeats across multiple Neanderthal sites. Skeletons showing healed fractures that would have required weeks of immobility. Individuals who survived into old age with severe arthritis, missing teeth, and physical limitations that made self-sufficiency impossible. Care for the injured and elderly was not an occasional act of kindness among Neanderthals. The skeletal record suggests it was a consistent feature of how they lived. They also made things that had no survival purpose at all. Researchers have found Neanderthal sites with eagle talons deliberately modified, cut marks consistent with removing them to be worn or displayed, not eaten. Pigments, including manganese dioxide and ochre, found in context suggesting body decoration rather than tool use. In 2018, researchers dated cave paintings in 3 locations in Spain to at least 64,000 years ago, a time when modern humans had not yet arrived in Europe. The only artists who could have made them were Neanderthals. This finding alone, published in the journal Science, forced a significant rewriting of how researchers understood Neanderthal cognition. Symbolic art, the kind of behavior long considered a defining marker of fully modern human thought, existed in a species that popular culture had spent a century portraying as incapable of abstract thinking. Then there is the matter of what happened between the two species directly. In 2010, the first sequenced Neanderthal genome revealed something that startled even the researchers who had spent careers studying human origins. Modern humans outside of sub-Saharan Africa carry between 1 and 4% Neanderthal DNA, not as a curiosity, as a functional, measurable part of your actual genome, inherited through generations of interbreeding between two populations that had been separately evolving for hundreds of thousands of years before they encountered each other again. This DNA is not evolutionary junk sitting dormant in your chromosomes. Certain Neanderthal genetic variants have been directly linked to modern human immune system function, skin pigmentation, and even how some people metabolize certain medications. Some Neanderthal-derived genes appear to have provided real survival advantages to early modern humans adapting to environments and pathogens Neanderthals had already spent tens of thousands of years adapting to themselves. You are, in a very literal genetic sense, partially Neanderthal, not metaphorically, specifically and measurably. If your ancestry traces outside sub-Saharan Africa, somewhere between 1 and 4% of your DNA came directly from them. And then, roughly 40,000 years ago, after surviving in Europe and parts of Asia for more than 300,000 years, far longer than modern humans have existed as a species at all, they disappeared. The explanation you most commonly hear is simple extinction through competition. Modern humans arrived, were smarter, outcompeted them for resources, and Neanderthals died out as a result. But researchers studying the actual archaeological and genetic timeline have found something more complicated and considerably more unsettling. The disappearance was not a sudden extinction event. It looks much more like absorption. Population genetics models suggest that as modern human numbers grew and Neanderthal numbers remained small and scattered, interbreeding over many generations may have functionally dissolved Neanderthal populations into the larger human gene pool rather than wiping them out through violent replacement. In other words, Neanderthals may not have lost a war. They may have been gradually absorbed into us, generation after generation, until there were no longer enough genetically distinct Neanderthal individuals left to be classified as a separate population, even though pieces of them, measurable pieces, persisted and still persist in nearly every non-African person alive on Earth right now. This reframes the entire story. Not a tale of a superior species replacing an inferior one. A story of two closely related populations of humans, separated for hundreds of thousands of years, encountering each other again, and in some unknown number of individual moments. Moments of connection, necessity, or circumstance we will never be able to recover. Choosing each other, repeatedly, across enough generations and enough encounters that the genetic evidence of it is written into the DNA of billions of people today. The species that buried its dead with flowers, that kept the injured alive for years past the point of usefulness. That painted on cave walls before anyone thought they were capable of art. That genome did not vanish from the earth. It became part of the genome currently reading this sentence. They did not fail to survive. In the most literal genetic sense available to science, they are still here. They just stopped being separate.